I just want to welcome everybody today to Setting Your In-House Expectations, brought to you by MightyHive. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Adam Remsen. I am the Director of Content Marketing here at MightyHive, and today we've got some great content lined up. To start, we have Joanna O'Connell. She is the VP Principal Analyst at Forrester, and she is going to share some insights from Forrester's recently released research, which is titled The Brand's Guide to In-Housing Media. After, she will interview our panel of experts, which we are lucky to have with us here today. That's Matt Bennett from Shopify, Jeff Rasp from Bear, and Cullen Urbano from MightyHive. Each one of these people have been through at least one digital transformation and lived to tell the tale. They all have extensive experience throughout the planning and building stages of in-house media departments, and I want to thank all of them for being with us here today. So a little bit about MightyHive. We are a new breed of media consultancy. MightyHive is a global leader in advanced marketing and advertising technologies. MightyHive provides consulting and services in the areas of media operations and training and data strategy and analytics. On the right, you can see some of our esteemed clients. And if you want to learn more about us or discuss your company's digital transformation steps, you can learn more at mightyhive.com, or you can email us at questions@mightyhive.com. After the webinar, everybody is going to receive a free copy of Forrester's The Brand's Guide to In-Housing Media. You'll get an email with a link. There will also be links to the slides and the video of this webinar as well. Next is just a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar will be about 45 minutes long. There will be audience questions at the end, and every one of you should have a Q&A button at the bottom, and please use that to submit your questions, and we will try to get to all of them today. So, with that said, before we get started, I want to take a poll. It's a simple poll just asking us why you joined us here today. Let me get it started. There. It's just asking you your main thrust of the reasoning behind why you joined us here today. Are you trying to learn about technology? Are you trying to learn about talent and staffing? Do you want to learn how long this whole in-housing process takes? There's a few questions there, and we will share the results with you later on in the presentation. So, today's host, Joanna. Some of you may know Joanna. She has extensive research and marketing experience in the digital advertising space, and we are very pleased to re-welcome her, to have her here today to present the results of the Forrester's field research on in-housing. So Joanna, take it away again.
Thanks so much, Adam. Really happy to be here. I'm going to be talking through some research that I did in collaboration with my wonderful colleague, Jay Patisol, who writes for CMOs at Forrester Research. I write for B2C marketers. I'm a VP Principal Analyst on the B2C marketing team. So we titled the research The Brand's Guide to In-Housing, but what's probably more important here is the subtitle, because the research is not designed to say, this is what you should do, and this is how you should do it, but rather to provide sort of an overview of what's going on in the market and why we think it's happening the way that it is, and then provide some useful, we hope, insights into how organizations should be thinking about picking the right model for them and then steps to take. So that's what I'm going to talk through today. So, what's interesting is that although I know certainly I've been in digital advertising for about 20 years, and the number of headlines I've seen around in-housing, certainly around programmatic media in-housing over the last 5 years, would lead one to believe that this is somehow a new phenomenon. But it really isn't. There's a really interesting article that I read on the Forays site, the ad agency association, that talked about the history of in-housing. And really, you can find mentions of in-housing going back to the 1930s, where brands were seeking to gain some of the advantage that agencies had in working directly with media companies. So at the time, things like cost management and more control were already starting to bubble up. Again, 1930s. But certainly we have seen that in the last 10 years or so, it does seem to be on the rise overall. This is some research that we did with the In-House Agency Forum that found that 72% of organizations that we surveyed actually had some in-housing function, some significant in-house agency function, excuse me. Next slide. And certainly, when we're looking at media, there is, as I said, over the last 5 years, there's been lots and lots of dramatic headlines, and there is a meaningful change in how brands are thinking about the management of their media. And so this is just an interesting bit from some other Forrester research that my colleague Jay did. But what I especially like is this particular quote from P&G's chief brand officer. We have it over here on the left hand of the slide, Mark Pritchard, who talks about the fact that 30% of the CPG giant's media strategy is now handled in-house. And what I like about this is what Pritchard says is our agency reinvention has not only saved $1 billion over the last 5 years, it's also leading to more creativity, agility, and entrepreneurship. And I think that is the really important part here. The idea of more creativity, agility, and entrepreneurship, I think, is sort of a more interesting idea and a more kind of modern way of thinking about this evolving sort of media management model, where it's not just about sort of saving money, which I think is what most of the headlines used to be about. And so to that point, it feels to, I think Jay and I, and having done this research, and we talked to some of the biggest brands in the world for this stuff, some of whom we could name and some of whom we could not, it did feel like there was a shift from what I think we mostly were hearing about 5 years ago. Oh, well, I'm not really sure what's going on with my money, and I'm not really sure that I am comfortable that my agency or my technology partners are taking what feels like a fair and reasonable fee for the work. And I'm not comfortable with that, and I don't trust them. And I think I can probably do it cheaper myself or more efficiently myself. We seem to be in a new phase where it feels more about strategic control and creating competitive advantage through an evolving media management model. So this is from Rob Roy, who was the chief digital officer of Sprint. He's over at T-Mobile now. And what he said when we were interviewing him for this research, I think really illustrates this point quite well. He said, we wanted to own our own destiny, to harness our data, how to use it, control it, keep it private. Then we could do things with it that made business sense. So this idea of owning their destiny and doing things with their own assets that they believed made the most business sense, I think is really representative of the kinds of things that we were hearing as we were speaking to these very senior marketers inside of some of the biggest global organizations in the world. So to support this point, we also, when we did the qualitative interviews with all of these brands, we also ran a quantitative survey and talked to a bunch of marketers through a survey to ask them just a bunch of questions around how they were managing media and sort of who was responsible for what, and kind of the digging into the why a little bit. So for the marketers that we spoke to that had in-house at least one media function, when we asked them why did they bring X channels, whatever channels it happened to be for them, in-house, what we found is that the most popular answer was to have more control over our paid media investments. Things like cutting agency costs were lower on the list. Again, just I think representative of the shift that we're seeing here, where it's about this idea of having control, owning your own destiny, being more responsive, being more nimble, being more tying media more to kind of business performance and the like. And also, to sort of support the point, when we asked folks that either had in-housed or were working using a hybrid model, and the hybrid model here being in-housing and outsourcing, some combination, when we looked at folks that had in-housed or were using a hybrid model, and we asked them, what specific functions or capabilities of your organization's paid media and advertising do you in-house or outsource? What we found is that the stuff that popped at the top of the list were more strategic functions. I think we were. It was a really interesting kind of dynamic for us to see play out in this particular survey question. Things like media strategy, analytics and insights, partnerships for media, for ad tech, for data. Those were the kinds of things that tended to have sort of been taken more in-house or had moved into more of a hybrid model with external partners versus completely outsourced. The things that were least common to have been in-housed or hybridized were more executional functions, the things at the bottom of the list. Media operations like trafficking, tagging, and QA, media execution for kind of hands-on keyboards kind of media like programmatic or search, and then buying of traditional media, that is to say typically television. Those things were less likely to have been in-housed or hybridized, and the more strategic functions were more likely. So now let's talk a little bit about what it takes when you're thinking about what kind of model is going to be right for your organization. It's important to think about 4 key pillars. And so I'm going to take you through each of them and give you just a little bit of depth on how we define each of these 4 pillars that you need to be thinking about. So the first one is strategy. And you can think of strategy as really setting the tone and focus for your media efforts. So this is a whole range of things, from understanding the media landscape itself, understanding how your target consumers actually consume or interact with media, what their patterns and preferences are. It's also about developing a media plan and the appropriate media mix and budgeting decisions that are going to be built on top of that, but also are going to be representative of what you understand from historical campaign performance, and also bumping all of that up against your performance objectives, long-term sort of big business objectives, and potential intermediary or short-term KPIs that you're going to be optimizing your media against. So those things, and one other, which is probably a little less obvious here, which is partnerships in the media world. So key media and media platform partnerships are also super, super important in this very complex and very fragmented media landscape in which we find ourselves. And as I say media and media platform because we are now living in a world where we have kind of traditional media companies, and then we have very technology-driven companies like the Facebooks and Googles of the world who operate more like ecosystems, like platforms, and you really need to be thinking about both. So that definitely has traditionally been the purview of the agencies, the media agencies, but what we are finding is there is an increasing amount of involvement on the part of brands, especially when it comes to the super important subset of most strategic media partnerships. The second one is data. And when you think about data, data is going to be supporting the strategy, underpinning the strategy, and it's also ideally going to be supporting and underpinning a very consumer-centric approach to your media decision-making. So again, ideally your strategy would be underpinned by a consumer-centric approach, but it absolutely must come to life in the data pillar. So this is everything from collecting, centralizing, normalizing your own first-party data, that is the data that is directly yours as a brand, assessing the value of third-party data for a few from a few kind of key dimensions. You know, does it pass the sniff test from a privacy standpoint? Is it efficacious? Does it actually provide value relative to cost? Things like that. And then increasingly, this is about driving second-party partnerships with publisher partners and other brands, in this world where third-party data itself is under, I would say, a pretty significant privacy microscope and some other kind of existential threats, certainly cookie-based third-party data. So when you're looking at these different kinds of assets, you have to think about what it takes to manage all of these. When you're talking about second and third party data, you need to be thinking about things like contract terms, negotiating things like transparency in provenance of the data, expectations potentially around performance, obviously things like price. Those are all baked into those data partnerships. I would say from a an in-housing standpoint, data is probably the most obvious place where we've seen brands lean in the most heavily, because they understand that their own first-party data is such a valuable and important asset, especially again in this world where we are living under an appropriate privacy microscope. Brands have leaned really heavily into taking more control of their data. So this one, it's not new to see organizations lean much more heavily into more direct involvement. The third one is technology. And I think it's really important to describe technology as an enablement layer and as connective tissue, which is to say technology does not drive your strategy. Your strategy is supported by technology. So the technology pillar is everything from selecting and managing the individual components of your ad tech stack. So think ad server or ad servers, demand side platforms, brand safety and quality tools, viewability tools, with one eye on kind of selecting the pieces, the componentry that are appropriate for your set of needs, but with the other eye on thinking about things like integrations with existing technologies that you already have, like in your MarTech stack. So as with data, when you're dealing with external partners, you need to be thinking about things like negotiating and owning the contractual terms like pricing, data rights, auditability, things like that. Technology definitely has traditionally been the purview of the agencies and other external partners. But this is another area where in the last few years, certainly, we've seen brands lean very heavily into much more direct involvement, if not outright control and ownership. And finally, the last mile here is execution. So execution is what moves your media programs and plans from theory, all of the things that you've set up already, to action. It takes them out into the wild. So it is, in some ways, somewhat unglamorous, but in many ways, absolutely vital to the health and success of your programs. So this is stuff like actually placing the media buys themselves, whether you are issuing insertion orders to publishers or other kinds of partners, or whether you are executing through buying platforms like DSPs. This is trafficking and dealing with tagging. This is optimizing within and across your different programs, managing things like pacing of your media so that you don't have 1 million impressions delivered 1 hour and 10 impressions delivered the next hour. Managing your media delivery against agreed upon terms, and then partner level billing and reconciliation. So unglamorous, but enormously, enormously important. I would say typically when you see brands that have completely in-housed all of their media operations, when they are managing execution, they tend to start with things like search, paid social, programmatic, which is not a channel, by the way. It's just a method of executing digital media programs, rather than things like traditional television buying, which is still heavily, heavily, heavily managed by the agencies. Okay, so there are 3 primary models. I'm not going to go through all of this in detail. It's in the report. You guys are all going to get the report. But the point here is that when you look at the 3 primary models, agency-led, where you really have the agency in the driver's seat across strategy, data, technology, and execution. Hybrid, where there's some variation of shared ownership across these different functions, and then fully 100% in-house, where the brand is owning and driving all of these pillars. Those are the 3 models. The thing to remember is that when you move upward toward an in-housed model and outward toward doing it across more of these pillars, it necessarily means there will be more complexity and there will be more level of marketer effort. That's the thing to remember. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all of the conditions for sustainable success in stages piece right now, because again, you will get the research and we talk in a great depth about each of these. But the point here is that you want to set yourself up for sustainable success by moving methodically, carefully, and thoughtfully through these stages. So it does not mean that day one you decide we're just going to kick our agency out and start running programmatic ourselves. It starts really with understanding, why do we think we want to do this? What do we think we want to do? what do we think the competitive advantages or ultimate business benefits are that are created by us doing this? And how do we think such a thing might be rolled out successfully around our organization? And then working carefully and thoughtfully to build out the baseline components and then ultimately to scale the operation across the organization. Because there are many, many, many particulars that you need to be aware of when you're thinking about doing this. And this particular quote, "In housing is not for the faint of heart," actually comes from Mr. Jeff Rasp, who was on this webinar, who my colleague Jay and I actually interviewed for this research. And so I love it. It sets it up nicely. There are several things that are important for you to remember when you are thinking about trying to take this on. It's things like setting internal expectations that transformational results take commitment. If people expect an overnight flip to be switched, their expectations will not be met. There has to be organizational commitment to doing something transformational. And that requires some patience and some time and some faith. Finding and satisfying the high expectations of rarefied media talent can be really arduous. And this is not just about hiring them. It's really about keeping them as well. That is sort of the new 21st century challenge when it comes to media management models. Aligning the organization to partners' payment terms can cause lots of friction. If you've got a procurement department, or excuse me, a billing department that's used to paying one agency, on a 90-day term, and all of a sudden you're asking them to manage the relationships with 10, 15, 20, 30 partners to get all those folks paid, that can cause some friction. And then finally, the likelihood that you will continue having external partners in the form of agencies of some kind is pretty high. To imagine that you're going to do all of these things yourself, I will say, in speaking to lots of organizations about this, you will find that most still have some external help of some kind. And it's really important that you are setting reasonable and clear rules of engagement for your external partners, especially if you are in the middle of evolving your approach, because it can create a huge amount of anxiety. So I think with that, we're going to do our panel. But before we introduce our panel, Adam, should we just throw up the poll and see what we learned? All right, so let's see. What is the primary reason that you joined today? So 22% to learn about the tech, 25% to learn how long it takes and the impact it has on the org, 22% to learn how in-housing can make my campaigns more effective, and then 15% for talent and staffing and learning how in-house impacts the bottom line budget. Long and short, a lot of diversity in answers here across all of these choices. So that's super interesting. So we'll have to try and touch all of those things, guys. Okay, so with that preamble for me, I'm going to invite my panelists to join me here. We've got Matt, Jeff, and Cullen, who are going to be joining me in what I hope is a really useful discussion for everybody. So guys, can you just quickly introduce yourselves, starting with Matt?
Yeah, sounds good. I'll kick us off. I'm Matt. I lead performance marketing at Shopify. So really our role within Shopify is demand gen and new customer acquisition by way of paid media.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Jeff?
Jeff Rasp, digital platforms capabilities at Bayer. Led the in-housing effort for the organization and lead media and measurement for Bayer Consumer Health.
Super. Hi, Jeff. Always good to chat with you. And Cullen?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everyone. My name is Cullen Urbano, Senior Director of Consulting and Marketing Transformation here at MightyHive. And I actually oversee the teams that we have here in the US, supporting both the media and the process transitions that marketers actually face when they're embarking on these in-housing journeys.
And Cullen's obviously working hard to be mighty today. Thanks all of you for joining us. I appreciate it. So let's just jump in. I've got a bunch of questions. I suspect the audience will have questions too, but I get to go first as our moderator. So I think maybe I'll start with Jeff and maybe Matt. What was the primary motivator for wanting to change your approach to media management? And maybe as part of your answer, you can kind of talk about what it used to look like and what you have moved toward or are moving toward. Jeff, go ahead.
Sure. So when I joined Bayer, we actually were running everything with an agency. We were on a non-transparent model, and that just didn't sit right. We had no insight as to what was running and how it was performing. And so we set that expectation early on. I think it's coming up on 6 years now since we kind of set that as our objective. What was our priority? Our priority was, as you've said really well through the research that you've done, we wanted to be in control of our destiny. We wanted to be able to set our buying strategy, realize all the efficiencies. We wanted to be able to hold media more accountable. We wanted a measurement model and a measurement framework that we stood behind and that was meaningful to our brand. We wanted a lot, and I would tell you that it is a long and difficult road, but it pays dividends far beyond, as you've perfectly said, far beyond what you would save in the way of agency fees. That is only the very tip of a very large iceberg.
And in a second, Jeff, I'm going to ask you what it kind of is looking like now for you guys, like what you in-house using that framework we talked about earlier, but
Sure.
Hang on.
Yep.
Matt, what about for you?
Yeah, apologies. My internet's cut in a few times. Hopefully it'll hold. But from my side, so first and foremost, Shopify has been in-house from day one. The focus in previous roles around in-housing, a lot of what you said, Joanna, throughout the research has really stuck in terms of strategy, data execution. I mean, I can almost do a read out of that, but like, I think that the pivot over the last several years has been the role of a marketer has really morphed. So really one part marketer, one part marketing technologist. So really our focus is always around tightening the feedback loop, talking about the ad platforms that we're using and we're deploying, ensure that we have deeper integrations with our CRM, our warehouse, our tag management on site, personalization on site. We've really had to rapidly get the folks that are fingers on keyboards closer to that feedback loop. You know, in certain scenarios, we've had folks that are part of our in-house team that are working really close with our decision sciences team, as well as CRM. And then in other scenarios within the business where we have an overflow, or we are working with a partner, it's making sure that they're close to those folks as well.
So what's so interesting too, and I can't believe I didn't point this out at the beginning, but we've got sort of a very new, young kind of technology and data-driven company in Shopify. And forgive me, Jeff, a more traditional, classic American institution of a brand, and yet both of you, I think, are thinking about this idea of how can we create a model that gives us the kind of control over our own destiny that we're looking for. So it is very interesting to note that. Jeff, then back to you for a second. We use this framework, you know, of strategy, data, technology, and execution. Can you talk a little bit about what aspects of the media operations you have in-house? What, if anything, is hybridized? What is entirely outsourced? You know, what does it look like for Bear right now?
Yeah. Well, this year was our transformation year where we went to full in-house. The only piece that we still have remaining being managed external is linear TV.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything else is in. We finished our 2-year journey last month with all of our digital media, all of our biddable media coming in-house. So we started off with only our strategy being managed in-house, and then setting the best practices with the team leads, the channel leads, and the execution was being managed by MightyHive.
Okay.
Very, very well.
So Jeff, it was agency. It moved to MightyHive. It moved then to Bear.
It did in one full swoop in a couple of months. I think it was 3 months, and it was a quick 3 months. We went from our current agency to MightyHive. The first year with MightyHive was kind of a steady state, getting them brought up on our new buying strategy and consistent measurement and all of the pieces that you need in place. And then 2020, crazy year to take it on, but 2020 was about migrating from almost exclusive activation being managed by MightyHive to now, as of last month, all of our capabilities being managed in-house.
Am I allowed to ask you how big the team is? You can tell me now.
I think so. Bigger than a bread box.
Roughly?
No, we're now up to a pretty decent sized team. Over 30 is, I guess,
Wow.
what I can share. A pretty substantial team across all channels and all measurement, and that is really what I would say that we did is we hired well, and we now have incredible thought leaders who are, it's almost self-fulfilling, right? You find really smart people, and you get smarter just by being around them, and
Totally.
but a great and amazing team.
Totally. I know what you mean. And we're going to talk about talent in a second, but Matt, for you, what is the what is the role of an organization like MightyHive for Shopify, where you sort of have been in-house from the start?
Yeah, so over the last couple of years, we've stood up many new in-house channels. We talked about programmatic display, audio, CTV. So primarily speaking, a company like Shopify has many different business units in how we operate. The role that MightyHive has played for us is one, working as a kind of an overflow. So when we have an influx of requests coming in from the organization that kind of fall outside of our day-to-day performance marketing tasks, we'll engage MightyHive as a bit of an overflow. And then also to different areas of the business that haven't fully scaled or we haven't yet invested in standing up a full team. MightyHive has come in and assisted those teams with their always-on builds.
Got it. Okay. So it's sort of a flex partner that's there to help with the ebb and flow, and also to help in, where you are investing in sort of newer areas, or there's something that where you need the extra help.
Yeah, another area of focus has been, MightyHive has a number of offices across the globe. So we work with channel partners in terms of finding channel market fit as we're expanding and as we're increasing our investment in different regions. Pull on their expertise of the local market.
Right, which can be incredibly important. So Cullen, maybe for you, what you're sitting across many clients. So when in the research, we talk about this idea of going through these phases, and we don't want to make it about a time horizon necessarily so much as like a goals horizon. But if you're looking at how organizations are rolling these things out, do you set expectations with them? Like, this is going to take, 6 months or a year, or 2 years, or this is going to take, a commitment from your board. This is going to take an investment of X. Like, what are the kinds of things that you say to clients, or you're seeing from clients who are going through any kind of transformation of their approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is what we feel to be one of the absolutely crucial aspects of successful in-housing, is managing those expectations, sort of what you were alluding to earlier, Joanna. Everyone has to be on the same page and understand that it is going to be change. Change is hard, but ultimately everyone needs to believe that this is the right move for the company, that it's going to generate that benefit for them in the long run. So other things that we always like to call out, is the timing of it can vary very, very drastically depending on how much of it you already have set up, how far you're looking to go. I know everyone always loves for me to put a time frame on it. So for the group here, it could take 6, 12, 18 months. It could even take 24 or more. Other things to consider is resourcing, staffing, where you're trying to look at building these hubs and how you're trying to better position these resources that are going to be part of your company for success in the long run. I think that's been a really crucial aspect. And then I feel like a mistake that some marketers come in with when they're looking at in-housing is that they approach it thinking that it just impacts marketing or just impacts advertising.
Totally.
But you really can't look at it that way. You have to acknowledge that marketing is a function within a broader business. And it has to align to all of the other processes like billing, or like the strategy, or the brand, the product marketing aspects of it as well. So all of those are really, really crucial expectations that should should be evaluated, should be assessed upfront.
And by the way, again, we did not write this research with the position that the answer is everything should always be in-house everywhere for everybody. That is definitely not what we say in the research. We really talk about what it takes to sort of successfully create whatever model is right for you. So I assume then that in housing, you also see as 1,000 shades of gray, Cullen, across your various clients.
Yeah, that's correct. So here at MightyHive, we have a framework that we like to refer to as the spectrum of control, right? I think a lot of people probably have seen our CEO, Pete Kim, present on exactly that slide, in various different formats. And what in-housing really means to us is not really looking at it from the perspective of a binary yes or no sort of equation, right? But really looking at, there's a lot of different responsibilities, Joanna, to your point of media planning. Even within media planning, you could take a hybrid approach of only overseeing aspects of it, right? We have a lot of clients that wanted to take in-house the strategic guidance of media planning, but leave tactical planning to an external partner, right? That's just sort of one example. And each in-housing journey is sort of identifying each of these different responsibilities and functions and figuring out how far the client wants to go and how far it makes sense for the marketer's business to go.
Yep. No, it's a great. And so maybe to that point, talent, let's talk about the people part of this for a bit. Jeff and Matt, this one's for you guys. Challenges in finding people that fit the needs that you wanted, and maybe then kind of how you think about retaining them, which seems to be the sort of new next frontier challenge that organizations face. Jeff, we'll start with you.
Okay. Yeah. We were 2020, we started our journey to building the team. And I'll tell you, we started off a little bit slow first few months, believe it or not, before, pre-pandemic. We were doing our hiring, obviously search, we were able to staff up pretty well, but, really qualified programmatic resources was tough. It's funny, we were falling slightly behind and then the pandemic hit, and it was amazing because absolutely amazing talent hit the market.
Oh,
so,
wow.
You don't want to benefit from a horrible situation like a global pandemic, but it certainly got us caught up very quickly because amazing talent came onto the market.
That's interesting. But that also means, Jeff, that you did not put a pause on plans to hire.
No, and you have to hire different too. I mean, you got to do everything remote. You got to, you're teching people out through, having them be on the keyboard, you looking over their shoulders through a screen share. You got to be nimble for sure. And I agree with you. We're learning now. Retention is key and real challenging because it's a different breed of people, right? Large, old, 180 some odd year old company hires, business MBAs. That's what we do, right? We don't hire technical, digital. We hadn't hired these digital people who function differently. They've lived, a different life and had different expectations that you have to manage, right? And so pretty much this last year, we've been going through the process of building out things that are key, career progression models, compensation models, to make sure that everybody understands what the North Star is, what they'll be able to count on in the way of their current role and how they expand, where the opportunities are for additional compensation, right? You've got to set all those pieces up, and it's a piece of this. Again, the iceberg or whatever.
Right.
It's stuff that you don't think you'd have to manage that you have to manage.
Yeah. You see the tip of the iceberg, but there's a giant iceberg underneath the surface, right?
Yeah.
Matt, how about for you? I mean, maybe first of all, where do you find talent? Are they coming from ad tech companies? Are they coming from agencies? Are they coming right out of college? Like, where are you sourcing people?
Yeah, it's a great mix across the board. Even also too, like even in ad operations, sourcing some of our we're looking at sourcing some of our support staff that are in the company today, and training and molding them. I think where we look for talent, similar to what Jeff was just saying, is I really praise our leadership teams in early on in the pandemic. They made a choice to let us all know that we are going to be working remote, and we're going to continue working remote. And that's opened up a whole new pool across the globe. So a lot of these areas that we were looking to staff for out of a centralized team in Toronto, now I can have folks that are working on APAC potentially be feet on ground in APAC, which is great. The other thing I was going to say is where we're sourcing them from. Like, what I always love is, we're looking for passion, and there's so many Reddit forums, there's so many Facebook groups, Twitter. These people are so passionate about the work that they do day in, day out. They're talking about it after hours on these forums, and it's an excellent place to source great talent that's passionate.
That's funny. I love it. That's a very non-traditional way to think about sourcing talent. That's awesome. So I don't know, Cullen, if this is a question you can answer, but again, you're seeing all kinds of different models. Where are you seeing, what is a successful kind of partner management model look like? So are you seeing sort of flavors of how organizations are evolving their agency relationships, how they're managing agency plus technology plus internal? Is there any kind of advice you can give folks or thoughts you have on that? Because it gets kind of complicated when you move from just, oh, my agency does everything, to I've got all of these different cooks.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sort of goes back to what I was alluding to earlier, where each of those responsibilities of media planning, media execution, reporting, all of those, understanding how far you want to go in terms of in-housing, or how much control really at the end of the day that you want to have over those functions. Where we typically advise our clients to go to is be very deliberate about what you want to have, and be very realistic about what the capabilities you can spin up to have around those functions are. So, don't try to take on the process of managing billing across 17, 18, 19, 20 different partners if you don't have a billing system and a billing team that are going to be able to accommodate for that. There's only so much you can really work through in terms of consolidation with these partners. So, for example, we have a lot of clients that are global brands. They're global marketers, and I'm not sure if any of you are aware, but billing in LATAM or in South America is very, very, very difficult. It's very complicated, particularly around taxes and between country to country. So if you don't have a billing team that can support that, or you don't feel comfortable building out the team that can support that, then those are the things that you want to consider engaging external support for. And that's sort of just one example, but that really applies to the entire process. So that's really where it's important to take a realistic stock of how you go to market with your media, right? What are the real processes that you go through, and then evaluating how easy it is to or how capable your org is to take those on.
Yeah, Jeff, you hit some of those bumps, right? We've talked about this before.
For sure. Yep.
Things like contractual terms and billing terms with new kinds of partners, right?
Yeah, for sure. But I'll tell you, it's all worth it when you start amassing these direct partnerships. It's amazing how badly they want to work directly with the advertiser. It's amazing what they open up to you that you were just kind of a third party to. That it is one of the areas that, had I not done it where we did everything, I still think owning as many of those partnerships directly, it brings incredible benefit. They bring innovation, they bring value add, expertise that you have direct access to, and that isn't in the agency model, that's not there. So painful for sure, but incredibly valuable to your business.
So what's the interaction model like? So for the linear broadcast stuff that's managed by an agency, how do you make sure that the parts are working effectively together? What's being managed internally and what's being managed with your external partner?
Yeah, so we have a measurement model that we just put in place, a new tool that's out that does let us measure across all TV. But we, like I'm hearing from Matt, we're also managing this migration of CTV as well, and starting to build that out or into our capabilities and our practice. And so we have a measurement model that is true for all, and we have
Okay.
a measurement model that is true specific to what migrates, right? Because we're able to buy that on an accountability model. And we measure those two separate, but we merge them together, or we look at them, together to see if the story that we're seeing for the CTV inventory is laddering into what we're getting out of at a linear.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, as I said, level of effort and complexity go up the more you kind of take on. But part of that, again, is you also are then managing a whole bunch of external partners, whether they're agencies or technology companies or media partners, and, kind of creating something that's cohesive is a real challenge. I mean, I think, especially when you're thinking about the consumer on the receiving end of all of this stuff. We do actually have a couple audience questions, but just quickly, for anybody that's at the beginning of this process, any advice you guys have, in terms of getting started or things to look out for? Matt, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, Jeff touched on this a bit, but get cozy with legal, get cozy with procurement, get cozy with security, and make sure that they're there from the onset.
And maybe your CFO.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big piece of the puzzle. I think when you're looking to staff, like, set goals and expectations for your team, ensure that they have a North Star that, all of their decisions are being formed off of. If you're supporting the entire organization, I think it's also really important to be clear and concise to the entire organization what your team's role is. And also too, if you are taking requests, make sure that you've got, a solid intake process to help evaluate. There's nothing like having a North Star and spending 90% of your time on things that are ad hoc requests, right? So
Totally.
that'd be the advice that I can give. Just be very clear and concise of what your mission is.
So I could not agree more. Cullen, you, and then Jeff, just thoughts from you.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I would say is just don't forget the process. Frequently, when marketers are looking at in-housing, they think very first and foremost of the tools and the technology, right? And then with the people needing to be those experts being a close second. But there's a lot of these functions that a lot of marketers haven't necessarily had insight into because they were managed and they were entirely operating behind the walls of an agency. So think very deliberately about how that media plan or that media brief is submitted or given to you by the brand team, the planning team, what have you, and how that needs to go through the step-by-step all the way to actually putting media out there.
Totally. Yeah, no, I know. You're right. There's the keep your eye on the North Star part, which is incredibly important. And then there's hey, there are proper process steps that you should always be mindful of. That also matters a ton. This stuff is complicated. Jeff, what about for you?
Yeah, I would just say, I'll underscore what Matt said. Didn't know that I'd be making the friends that I now have across the business. Certainly my leadership has been absolutely key. We get close with them. They are the difference between success and failure. Know that you have to manage every detail. Success is baked into every step, and even some of the minute things that you don't think you need to focus on are worth your focus, because small problems like buying structure or buying strategy manifest themselves in bigger problems down the road. So get a crystal ball, spend a lot of time looking into it, trying to figure out what's ahead. Talk to folks like us. We'd love to share what we know and help you on your journey. And the last one I would say is get yourself some thick skin, because there is going to be lots of bruises that you'll take on, and you won't even know where they're coming from at times.
I was going to say probably both internal and external, right?
Cover up, know how to cover up, take your punches and move on. Good days, bad days.
So we actually got some awesome audience questions. So I want to switch gears to those. One was, do organizations tend to set up a single internal agency, or does ownership pass into individual brand teams? My assumption is it's the former. Having a whole bunch of individual brand teams with agencies seems like an operational nightmare. Cullen, what are you seeing?
It is typically split out by, consolidated. The one exception that we'll see is when each of those LOBs or brand units are just so specialized. They're so focused that you need to develop that. You need to have people that are just dedicated towards running media or running or in-housing for that specific product, brand line, what have you.
Okay, interesting. That's helpful. Can you share a POV, any of you, on which of the agency functions are considered most valuable to in-house and which may be better staying off with the agency? I talked about it a little bit, but it would be useful to hear from you guys. You know, agencies do have value. We know they have value. And by the way, there are also good agencies and not good agencies. There are good account teams and less good account teams. So can you talk a little bit about where you see the opportunity to really rely on the agency versus internal?
I'll take it.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
I'll go real quick. Sorry. I'll tell you, and maybe I'm jaded. We brought in our channel leads. So we had our strategist already in house, and then we brought in folks to lead each of the respective channels, and measurement I had already had as well. And they put together our buying strategy. I'll be honest, we had a model where for the first year where MightyHive was doing the activation, and once they understood our buying strategy, I'll tell you, exceptional team. I would say in a lot of cases, if you aren't ready for the heavy lift that goes into building a massive team and all the things that you're hearing about, finance and paying bills and all the crap, taking on measurement for sure and strategy for sure, and then your channel leads that set the direction, and then have a really good execution partner who has to live into what you are putting together. So for us, it was a great model. The first year, we learned a lot with an execution partner or an activation partner like MightyHive that was living into what we built, but delivering it with excellence and producing the results that got us through our first year.
Matt, how about for you? Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think the idea of, I talked earlier about being close to the data and executing on an always on model. I think where I've seen a lot of value with some of the agency partners that we work with is more so on the experiential side. There's a lot of executions that we've done across the globe that simply would never have landed on our desk.
Right.
Wouldn't have known that they were available or possible. And quite honestly, a lot of them are some of the favorite campaigns that we've executed. And also local market expertise. Definitely lean in there on local market expertise.
Totally. I mean, Cullen, you made that point too. Like, who wants to deal with billing in South America if you've never had to deal with billing in South America before? Cullen, what about just, there are a bunch of questions now, but do you see particular industries or verticals leaning more into a more in-house model versus a less in-house model? Or is it really, can you not kind of classify it that way?
It's a little bit difficult too, because I think marketers across the board have so many different reasons to in-house. And so, even though there's not a reason for it based on actually your vertical, there might be a lot of reasons for it based off of, how you're actually trying to converse and communicate with consumers. I would say though, that if there's any trend, it's those that are more specialized verticals, right? So think pharma, or ones that really leverage and are very digital first. So, I'm not just saying that to butter up Jeff and Matt here, but their brands are very, very good examples of that.
So last question. I think a real value of having external partners, whether they're agencies or consultancies or whatever, is outside perspective, and being able to look to someone whose job it is to sort of stay current on what's happening in the world of media and technology and kind of consumer behavior. How do you guys stay current? Is that a challenge?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. We put a lot of pressure on our media partners. We talking about that passion earlier. We expect the same passion out of our strategic partners in the space, and challenge them to bring us, what's going to give us an edge, what's going to remove friction. How can we get smarter? How can we ensure that the activity that we're doing on online video is having an impact on direct and organic as well. But really leaning in on our strategic partners and challenging them.
And we're officially over time, but just Jeff, 10 seconds. Would you agree with that?
No, I've got a team from across the industry, and each of them are so passionate they keep up. And then, as I said, those direct partnerships, they are constantly bringing us things, quite honestly, that are not even in the market. We're always exposed to new and innovative stuff.
Totally. Doing alpha and beta opportunities with partners. Totally.
For sure.
I went over. I'm sorry, Adam, I couldn't help it.
No, that was great. And so it's worth it. I really appreciate you, Joanna. You did a great job. Thank you so much. And panelists and Joanna, I couldn't have imagined a better group of people to tackle this subject. So really, thank you very much today. It was wonderful. I also want to thank the audience because we got a lot of engagement, a lot of questions, and and just appreciate your time first and foremost. But for any questions we didn't get to, I'll reach out to the panelists and try to follow up with you directly on that. Also, our panelists have all been very generous with ways to reach out and contact them directly. We really appreciate that as well. Jeff Rasp at jeff.rasp@bear.com. Matt, your Twitter handle is Matt1 Bennett, and Cullen, your email's there as well. So
I didn't make the cut somehow, but I'm just at Joanna O'Connell on Twitter.
Oh, my apologies.
Okay.
Well, also just for those of you who liked this, we have our own little homegrown version of webinars called Live with MightyHive, and they're similar to this. And Jeff has even been a guest on one, and we appreciate him very much. So you can go check that out at livewithmightyhive.splashthat.com. And if you have any ideas for questions or you just want to suggest an episode idea, you can email us at live@mightyhive.com. So with that said, thanks again to panelists, Joanna, our audience, and everybody. Have a great rest of the week.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.